And the first item is approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as printed?
Mayberry.
Mayberry and Langford. Moved by Mayberry, seconded by Langford. Any issues with that agenda? Anybody want to add anything, change anything? A couple things we did talk about. I don't know that we necessarily need to add the agenda, but something that Lisa brought up that David would maybe, or Lisa would maybe bring a brief update on discussions that library staff had with SWOC's Inform and Engage Committee about possible library changes in SWOCs. And maybe Lynn or myself would give a brief update at the end of the meeting on where we're at with new library CEO, chief librarian recruitment. But I think that's the only things I would suggest, maybe not necessarily a change to the agenda, but anybody else? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Adoption of board minutes of the previous meeting. I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes of the December 13th, 2021 meeting. Larry? Julia? Any issues with those minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And whoops, I just put my monitor to sleep. Sorry about that. Delegations and presentations, there are none. Consideration of delegations and presentations, none. Consideration of correspondence, 7.1, Dina Stevens, Executive Director, Federation of Ontario Public Libraries. Recommendation that the correspondence dated December 14th, 2021 and January 24th, 2022 be received. Lisa, is there anything you want to speak to on that before I ask for a motion and call a vote?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to just give a little bit of background. FOPL, or the Federation of Ontario Public Libraries, was established in 2004. And at that time, they were approaching all libraries in Ontario to see if they would become founding members. And a number of county libraries at that time expressed a fair amount of concern about, at that time, there being limited rural representation on the board. And also the membership fees were considerably higher for county libraries than a single standalone library system. So at the time in 2004, we opted not to become a founding member. I think since then, though, there's no question that FOPL has achieved a lot in terms of advocacy for public libraries. We belong to ARUPLA, which is an association of county libraries. And as ARUPLA, we have an associate membership with FOPL for, I think it's $500 a year. And we get very limited access to FOPL information through that associate membership. We get some emails and that's about it. We certainly do miss out on training and research, but I think one of the main reasons why public libraries want to be a member of FOPL is that it truly is one voice for public libraries. Its role is to speak with one voice and therefore be stronger as an advocate for public libraries. I'm not suggesting that you consider membership right now. We did not budget for it, but they have addressed our main concern back well, for the last many years. They've reduced the rate for county library systems from what would be $3,250 a year to $1,800 a year. So I think that's quite a significant change. And I would suggest that in your budget deliberations later this year, that you consider FOPL membership. And certainly if you have any questions or if you'd like any further information, I'd be happy to provide it.
Any questions? Larry, go ahead.
Just one question, and it has to do with dollars once again, Lisa, but is there any kind of an explanation? Is it circulation or what as to why I believe it's Tillsonburg is double or is $900 and that is the equivalent to the others all added together? Is there any explanation as to why that is so high?
I can only assume it's because the population of Tillsonburg must have reached a certain band, which jumps the fee significantly. So yes, Tillsonburg is more, but that is because Tillsonburg is among our member municipalities is certainly the largest population.
I know they're at, I think it's 17,000 and like Norwich is at 11,000. So there's 7,000 difference there. And I'm not too sure just what Ingersoll is at off the top of my head, but I know it was in that report, but the others all about the same, $150 a piece, I believe it was. So I was just curious if it had to do with circulation, size of the population or what it was. So
I would assume there's a 15,000 population band.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else? And I'll just say too, my bandwidth here in council chambers is low, and so there's some people's video that I'm not seeing. So if you have a question and I'm not asking you, feel free to just unmute yourself and pipe up. I don't want to miss you because of my low bandwidth here. A question that I have then, Lisa, is I'm always a big fan of advocacy, and especially for relatively small municipalities, right? I always say to residents, believe it or not, the mayor of Little Tiny Zora Township can't just get the premier on the phone and plead his case. But if we collaborate, then we can. And so it's the potential, at least, of this organization is appealing to me. But I always then think about what are our actual issues that we might like to drive through that advocacy, and there has to be some kind of alignment there, or else what's the point? So what I'm wondering is, before we just receive and file this, I'm thinking about this board, or more likely the next board, will hopefully be having some kind of strategic discussions. Where do we want to go? And they may want to consider then membership in this. So could we, and it's a little bit trickier than normal times because you're only going to have one more board meeting, could this be put in a file somewhere to come back to a subsequent board meeting for consideration when they're having those strategic discussions, to say, we can have these strategic discussions and we have the potential to look for some kind of allies, some kind of bigger voice to champion those issues if they decide to. They may decide not to, but I think it would be good for them to consider those two things together if they have those issues anyway.
Certainly, it'll be an open file. One of the main advocacy points that they've done in the last few years is trying to protect the public library's operating grant. Back in 2019, I believe it was, there was some fear that the PLOG was going to be reduced, and FOPL did quite successfully lobby the government to keep it at the current level. So certainly funding is one of their chief concerns.
Okay. Anybody else on this? So I'll need a mover and a seconder to receive and file. Moved by Larry, seconded by Regina. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And reports, 8.1, statistics. Recommendation that statistics for the 1 month ending January 31st, 2022 be accepted. Lisa, is there anything you want to highlight in that statistics report for the board?
Yes, thank you. I think it's quite interesting looking at the statistics. I went back and looked at January of 2019, so pre-COVID, just to see how we stack up compared to then, because we're still in recovery. We know that we're still not back to normal, and it was quite interesting. You see too that our circulation stats from January of this year against January of last year are quite a bit better in most branches. But even comparing it to January of 2019, there are several branches whose circulation rate is higher this year in January than January 2019. And that includes Brownsville, Burgessville, Harrington, Mount Elgin, Otterville, Plattsville, Princeton, and Tavistock. And I was wondering why is that? And my guess or my sense is that patrons are becoming quite used to staff pulling materials for them, which is something that started in COVID to a much greater extent. And we even see it with the amount of holds that are being transported by our library van. It's quite significantly higher. So I think people are relying on staff and relying a lot more on holds to get their books to them. And branches that pre-COVID enjoyed healthy attendance numbers and good programming numbers, and by those I'm talking about Ingersoll, Tillsonburg, and Norwich primarily, are at about 60 to 70% of normal numbers or pre-COVID numbers, which is also what I would expect from what I'm hearing from other libraries too. They're saying they're kind of at the 50 to 60% recovery. We're at 60 to 70, so I think that we're doing okay. Then when I looked at the e-resources, and I took out Press Reader, which is the only resource being counted that we didn't have pre-COVID. our January 2022 e-resources stats are 40% higher than they were in January 2019. So I think that's really good growth too. So again, as I would expect, COVID really brought a lot of our electronic resources to the forefront for people.
Any questions from the board on that report?
Yes.
Larry?
This isn't necessary with report, but it is and it isn't. How is things, have they settled down in Burgessville? I see that they said that they've been closed because of staffing issues, but has things kind of settled down there and people acting a little bit more, shall we say, sane?
Burgessville and Otterville have reopened. They've been open now for, I would say, at least 2 weeks. So things are back to normal there. And I would say we're really not experiencing too many issues in Burgessville. In Norwich, it's at curbside. So there are a lot of people coming and refusing to wear a mask at curbside, but as long as they're physically distanced, that's all right. So I would say things have been fairly stable the last little while.
Okay, that's good to hear though.
Marcus,
Anyone else?
Yeah, Marcus.
Go ahead, David.
Lisa, just curious on the holds, and the idea is over the last couple of years at curbside, basically that was a holds model, right? Like that's really what they were doing. And is this sort of an indication that that our patrons have in fact moved to a just-in-time service, where I don't go into the library to look for a book. I just call you up and tell you, I want this book, and you call me or email me, whatever, and say it's here. And I'm wondering if that isn't what we're really seeing. And it's, you know, and so call it holes, call it whatever you want. I think that's where I think this is going. I just wondered what you thought of that.
I think it's a combination of things. You're right. For some people, it is a just-in-time service. They're now ordering books and they're notified when they're ready and they come to pick them up and that's it. Curbside means no browsing. So people have not been able to browse the shelves and pick out their own materials. But we're doing a variety of things. There are people who call up the library staff person and say, I plan to come this afternoon. You know what I like. Can you gather 10 books for me? Or they'll arrive at curbside to pick up their hold and say, I heard about a book. Do you know, do you have it? And then the branch staff will run to the stacks and get additional items. So there is still a little bit of that browsing happening. It's just not the patron that's doing the browsing. It's the staff who's running to the shelves for them.
But
yeah.
that's sort of where I was going with it. It seems to me that what we're seeing is a different kind of service, right? Instead of me going and looking through, you know, 10,000 items, I'm just saying this is what I want, or this is the genre that I want, and somebody else is doing it for it. And that's sort of my gut feeling on it, anyways. And that seems to be the way society is. They want somebody else to do all the work, including going through a whole bunch of bookshelves.
Well, we'd noticed that had been happening even prior to COVID. I think people's time is of the essence. People don't have a lot of patience to spend browsing the shelves. That's why we instituted the Quick Pick collection that's hot bestsellers and 7-day, 10-day loans. And we've really prioritized the marketing of placing staff picks or new books right front and center, just like they do in a grocery store, that sort of impulse buy approach.
Anybody else on that report? I'll need a mover and a seconder to receive and file the January statistics report. Moved by Laura, seconded by Julia. I can't see on my screen, but I can see her out of the corner of my eye for that. Anybody want to speak to that? Larry? Or are you voting?
I'm sorry, I was voting. I'm sorry, I was voting.
Sorry,
I
Larry.
apologize.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And 8.3, no, sorry, 8.2, librarians report. Lisa, is there anything you want to highlight in that before I ask the board for questions?
Again, another COVID-19 update, and we've appended the notice that went out to the public. I think it was dated February 1st, just for your information. As I mentioned earlier, I'm really pleased that the last few weeks have been really stable in terms of staffing. We have no recent absences of staff attributable to COVID, so that's good. I've given you a little bit of insight into what we're thinking of in terms of in-person programming, taking it slow, but looking at starting with adult programming, particularly the literacy-based programs like adult book clubs that took place in our libraries. So we're in touch with our book clubs and groups that did use the library, especially those groups that relied on the library for meeting space, to see if we can accommodate them. In terms of children's in-person programming, a lot of effort's gone in to do a really fantastic virtual March break. So with the exception of activity kits that are going to be available to pick up at all branches, and the Tillsonburg Town Center programming that's going to take place on a limited basis in Tillsonburg during March break, we're going to remain with the virtual model. We think that that will, that's a better idea. Then after March break, looking towards the end of March, we'll be looking at going to in-person children's programming, working with Early On for the baby programs, and then we'll look after the school-age children's programming. So that's for the COVID. I gave you a bit of an update on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee work. And I talked about the Indigenous awareness policy that was to come back to the board for review after it was first reviewed in June last year. It is ready to go, but we are going to wait until the new county DEI coordinator is in place. As with the code of conduct, which is almost ready to go as well, I think both of those policies will be better informed if it runs through that person's lens to get some added insight. In terms of staff training, we had the OLA super conference virtually, and it was fantastic to let so many staff people be able to take part. Every branch staff person, with the exception of the pages, were able to attend sessions, and I know that some of them continue to, because we do have 6 months to watch them. So I think that virtual model for a conference, while you lose out a lot in the networking of being in person with your colleagues, it certainly has been advantageous financially. It's allowed us to send so many more staff. And I don't know if any of the board members attended any of the sessions, or if you plan to at your leisure over the next few months. Did anybody have any comments or anything they wanted to bring up about the OLA conference?
Hi, Lisa. I just had, I haven't actually, I didn't do it on that weekend. Let's put it that way, right? So I've earmarked a few of them because there were some really interesting ones for board members. So it's on my to-do list.
I was just going to say I really enjoyed Mary Rowe with the Canadian Urban Institute. If you don't have a lot of time to tune into one, that was a really good one.
Just going to say
Great.
that I tuned in and I listened to most of the keynote speakers. I thought they were very, very well spoken, and they were very well presented. That I found them very interesting. And unfortunately, I got called out on Saturday, so the one I should have been at, I wasn't at, but I was at all the rest of them. So anyway, I'm quite sure I'll maybe more than likely be able to pull up the Saturday one and see it as we go on. Anyway.
Okay, well, carrying on with the staff training, we're having our next staff development day on March 28th. It will be in person at the Ingersoll Library with the option of it being hybrid, like we did last time for those staff members who either don't want to come to an in-person meeting or can't make it. We'll be able to participate as well. And I mentioned Niche Academy. I'm really thrilled that we have this. It's going to be a fantastic training platform for the public as well as for staff. And we're going to be able to develop a lot of custom content, instructional videos on how to use our resources, or basically any topic. So I would certainly encourage board members to suggest topics, instructional topics, things that you wish you knew more about, or things that you think that people would like to know, because over the next few months we'll really be gearing up with those kinds of video creation. And then staff news, we did have some staffing changes. Murley left us to go on to Mississauga Library, which is our loss for sure. And we have our new Tavistock person in place. Amy Cole started last week. So is getting some training now, working alongside Ingersoll staff, and then and is starting to work in Tavistock as well. And the nice thing about that arrangement is our longstanding staff members in Tavistock, Deb and Kathy, are still going to be putting in some shifts now and then, so the public are still going to be seeing their familiar faces. And also, I had hoped to provide a staff presentation on maker culture this month. We were supposed to do that. If we have to put it off a month, it might be better when we're in person. I think would be more dynamic anyway. But the staff person who is going to be instrumental in running our Maker Lab in Ingersoll suffered an injury, so he's off work right now. So we really didn't feel that this was the month to do it. And then, as we mentioned earlier with the Southwest Oxford Inform and Engage Committee, Christina and I attended, and Councillor Mayberry was there at the meeting, and Chair Ryan as well. And it was really interesting. It was the first time in a long time, because of COVID, that we've been able to sit down with township people and community representatives and talk about the library. And there were some things we heard that were hard to hear. You know, it was difficult to hear some of these things, the way that COVID has impacted the library, the way that our reduced hours has impacted the community, the way that the lack of stable staffing in Brownsville over the past several years has impacted. So it was good to hear, and I really think that those kinds of opportunities to sit down with those types of township committees would be really valuable to pursue.
Anybody have any questions on Lisa's report?
I might make a couple of comments on the meeting we had with Lisa and Christina. First of all, I very much appreciated both of them being there. I think it was a couple of things that have happened at the library board, but also things that are happening at the township and what people are hearing. So as Lisa pointed out, the concern around, particularly in Brownsville, everybody loves the librarian in Mount Elgin. But the person in Brownsville just not enough hours, and so it's difficult to get somebody to stay there. I think from the council's perspective, or from our committee's perspective, they were interested in better use of the facilities, so the hours per week, the long-term future of the library. Where are we actually going with the library, and how do we prepare for that? I think there's an acceptance that we're moving away from having to have thousands of books on the shelves to eventually moving to a more digital-based one. So there's interest in joint use of the libraries, of the individual libraries and the facilities that they're hosted in. In both cases, they're community halls. Is there a better way of using that, or co-using the facilities that are there now? So while the library has the lease, is there some other organization that could use the library space at the same time? And right now, because they're full of books, that's a little bit difficult. But I think our committee was thinking, as things change, how are we going to be kind of at the forefront of that change? And what library service, or what service could the library provide? And we've talked about Service Ontario or Service Oxford or whatever. And is that something we want or not? And so I really appreciated Lisa and Christina sort of opening the conversation and being open to the challenges and realities of a small library. One of the things that did strike a chord, and I very much appreciate Lisa saying it, was that the Mount Elgin Library is actually in the wrong place. And this is part of a community discussion that's been going on for a while. And it was nice to hear somebody from the outside say, yeah, great library, it's just put it in the wrong place. It's on the wrong side of Highway 19, is what people are saying. So. And it was nice to hear somebody from the outside for the community, somebody from the outside to say the same thing. So that will lead into a much broader conversation as we get down the road. So I appreciated that as well. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Marcus.
Anybody else have anything? I would just, the one comment that stood out, that you made, Lisa, was something that stood out for me from the meeting, and that was, it was really refreshing to have an actual discussion about service delivery with residents, which I feel has really been choked off by COVID. It wasn't in person, which would have been even better. But I think, as you said, you acknowledged that there were some things that were hard to hear. And I think we really need to find ways to get back to that. And hopefully the next board will do some more of that in terms of its, some of the activities that we dropped, frankly, because of COVID, right? All the different ways that you had come up with for us to try to reach out to people and talk to them about it. That was all choked off, and it really was refreshing to hear some of those things, difficult though some of them may have been to hear. It really was good and constructive to have those actual conversations with representatives of the local community about what they thought of the service they were getting and what they wanted that service to be. Was really good. So yeah, I can't commend you guys for showing up for that, first of all, but also for the local committee for asking for it, for saying we want to talk about this too. It really was a reminder to me of what this work's supposed to be, really, that we've been missing for almost 2 years now. So
If I can just interject, I think tomorrow we have our next committee meeting, and I think the subject will be, okay, where from there? And one of the things was, how do you, I think for sure, how do we expand the use of the facility? And the other is, how do we get the public to engage and say, this is what we want in the facility too?
anybody else on that report? I have a mover and a seconder to receive and file that report. Moved by David, seconded by Regina. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then we're up to 8.3, 2022-02 accessibility in the library policy. So the recommendations that the library board approve the policy as presented, and for the library board receiving the County of Oxford's accessibility standards for customer service policy and the multi-year accessibility plan for information and discussion purposes. Lisa, is there anything you want to highlight in there?
A couple of things, thanks. The need for a statement is relatively new. The last time we went through accreditation, it was not required. So this time around, this is a review of board policy, but having that statement in place is another way to satisfy accreditation requirements. It's also adopting the County of Oxford's accessibility standards for customer service and its multi-year accessibility plan, sort of formally saying, yes, we're following those. And it also sets out some requirements for training that wasn't part of the accreditation process last time. All employees, when they start with the county, receive AOD customer service training, and counselors, I believe, in your orientation at the lower tier level, receive AOD training too. But our citizen representatives on the board do not receive that training through us at this time. So we will sometime this year get that training for you. It's very simple. There's some excellent online resources that don't take very long. So we'll follow up with you on that. I thought including the county policy and the multi-year plan might be of interest to you. So if you had a chance to look through or have any questions, they're really very, very good. They cover everything that we need to worry about. In terms of our policy itself, we have our statement of organizational commitment, which is the critical piece. And then we have some operating principles that address the main points of the AODA customer service requirements related to library service. So assistive devices, accessible formats, accessible technology, communication, feedback process, service animals, service disruptions, support persons, and training. In terms of the multi-year accessibility plan, the library is referenced in a few places. I don't know if you looked through, but I'm just going to highlight them here. One requirement is that our self-serve kiosks meet AODA standards. And for us, that really only represents the 2 self-check units in Ingersoll and Tillsonburg at this time. The library provides collections in accessible formats, which we do. We provide large print, audiobooks, electronic audiobooks, ebooks. We have DAISY readers that we lend out. Those are for people with visual impairments, and we provide home delivery services. So we do satisfy that requirement. and in terms of our public spaces. With new builds and with renovations, of course, our county facilities takes care of that. It relates to parking spaces, service desks, computer stations, automatic doors, and ramps. And I would say that over the last few years, our facilities, certainly the ones that are owned by the county or the township, are fully accessible. And even in some cases, the privately owned facilities, there's been a lot of work done on them too. So I think we're in good shape. Did anyone have any questions about AODA or accessibility issues in the library?
Sorry.
It's just a comment, and you may think it's kind of being awful petty, but my understanding was, and either Lisa or Lynn could help me on this, we're not supposed to be using the word disability anymore. It's a challenge, or the appropriate word, I don't know. I can't find the appropriate one or what it was supposed to be. The word disability, I thought, was supposed to disappear from our vocabulary.
I think if I remember, it went from calling people a disabled person to
Okay.
person living with a disability.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Anybody else?
Julie has her
Okay.
hand up, Marcus.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see you. Sorry. Go ahead, Julie.
Okay. This was about it mentioned briefly about the website, and I know there was a big overhaul of the website. Was that to include this legislation, or was that just because the website needed to be updated?
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, Julie. Are you referring to the website? Are you talking about the library website or the county website?
The library website.
That is actually taken care of by the county IT department. They are working to bring our website up to AODA standards. And in terms of our catalog, that's a condition of our contract with Cersei Dynex. They had to meet all of our accessibility needs.
For clarifying that, Lisa.
Anybody else? Questions on that report? I'll need a mover and a seconder then to receive and file. Moved by Laura, seconded by David. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And no unfinished business, no notices of motion, new business inquiries and comments. I guess we covered the OCL virtual visit to the SWOX Engage and Inform Committee. I guess, Lynn, at this point, do you want to give just a very brief status update, I guess, more status than details on where the recruitment is at, or do you want me to do that?
Well, you've participated in every event I have, so I'm certainly prepared to let you take the reins here.
Okay. Okay. So I don't want to give too much away to the board. There's specific individual people involved in it. So I'm going to err on the side of caution and be brief in it. But we did get a list of resumes from the recruiter. We went through those. They had already reduced it down from all the people that applied to a quantity that they felt was just the right amount, but also appropriate people. The panel met and agreed with that and agreed to interview them all. And we went through the first round of interviews, and we're currently finalizing the second round of interviews right now, hoping to have a final recommendation within the next, let's say, 2 weeks. I don't really want to say any more than that again, because I don't want to get into the area of identifiable individuals. But if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to try and answer them without, again, giving away too much. But I just felt you should all have an update on where we're at with that. I didn't want you to think that it was not happening. Scheduling's been a bit of a challenge to get everybody together for these things, but we are moving forward with it. Anybody have any questions on that?
The obvious question is the panel relatively satisfied with the caliber of applicants? And, is there someone potentially out there that looks pretty promising, or more than one?
So I would say that we specifically had discussion about the group of candidates that were put forward to us by the consultant, and that we were satisfied at that point, having not interviewed any of them, that they were all reasonable candidates. We specifically talked about that after the first round of interviews, and that we felt that they were all reasonable candidates for us to have interviewed, and narrowed it down at that point to the people for the second round of interviews. And I think it was. I think I would characterize it as unanimous, that everybody felt that there was definitely potential candidates in there that we would be happy to hire. So there was no feeling, I think, David, that this isn't what we were looking for. I think it was very much more a case of, yes, there are legitimate candidates here, and we will have to choose from amongst them, if that's what you were asking. Okay. Anybody else? All right, so then that was new business. Is there any other inquiries or comments on anything that was not on the agenda? Larry?
Money again. When was the last time the provincial, I'll call grant, visited or updated? Or is it just updated so much by the cost of living each year? Has it been $140,000 since NOAA got off the ark?
You're close when you talk about NOAA. I think they reduced the plug by about 40%, and I believe it was the early 1990s, and it hasn't been increased since then. Now it does go up as your population increases. It's a per household, but no, the rate has not gone up.
Thanks, Lisa.
Anybody else? So there is no closed session, so no consideration of closed. So if nobody has anything else, we're up to adjournment. I have a motion to adjourn. Larry, seconded by Julia. All those in favor? And we're adjourned. Thanks a lot, everyone.